You were in the United States. You didn't want to stand for the national anthem.
Brittany Griner is one of the WNBA's most polarizing figures, and not because of her stats. Most infamously, it's the relentless speculation about her gender. Now, Stephen A. Smith may have just added fuel to that fire by dropping a clip many believe finally answers the question. This could be the final blow to her already fragile public image. Let's get into it. The campaign that exposed deeper truths. The story begins with what should have been just another routine podcast appearance for Smith, who had recently signed a staggering 5-year, $100 million contract with ESPN, cementing his position as one of the most powerful voices in sports media. Fresh off this career-defining deal, Smith appeared on the Valuetainment podcast hosted by Patrick Bet-David, ready to deliver the kind of bold, unfiltered commentary that had made him a household name and earned him that astronomical salary. What happened next would become a lightning rod for controversy, sparking debates about media responsibility, athlete accountability, and the complex relationship between sports figures and their public personas. During this podcast appearance, Smith launched into a scathing, no-holds-barred critique of Brittany Griner, the Phoenix Mercury center who had become one of the most polarizing figures in professional sports following her highly publicized ordeal in Russian detention. The crux of Smith's argument centered on what he presented as evidence of Griner's ingratitude and continued problematic behavior following her release from Russian prison. Smith had discovered what appeared to be inflammatory quotes from Griner on social media, specifically from an Instagram account called The Sports Memory, which suggested that the WNBA star was actively complaining about American sports fans and expressing dissatisfaction with the attention and support she was receiving. To be fair, Griner has been the target of harsh online criticism for years, including comments like this:
Brittany Griner is, in fact, a man.
Many dismissed the post as satire or misinformation, but not Stephen. He treated it as something far more serious.
Can you type in Brittany Griner?
I'd bring you on.
I'd have fun with you. Brittany Griner, what she says, she says right there, watch this. Every time we play her, there's this commotion, like this loud rumbling from the stands. Turns out it's people, thousands of them, just sitting there watching on purpose. It's very disruptive. She says WNBA games used to be a chill, quiet place. You could bring your laptop and relax, maybe even get a little work done. But now, it's like there's large gatherings of people watching us from the stands. Some of them are yelling crazy shit about what they're seeing.
Without hesitation, Smith seized upon these quotes as confirmation of what many critics had long suspected about Griner's true feelings toward America and her fellow citizens. The fabricated statement painted Griner as ungrateful, entitled, and dismissive of the very people who had supported her during her darkest hours, a characterization that, for many observers, seemed entirely consistent with her previous behavior and public statements. The criticism that followed was brutal and personal. Smith questioned Griner's gratitude in the harshest possible terms, stating,
Respectfully, Brittany Griner was in a Russian prison. You would think that somebody who is now free, back in America, on home soil, would not have too much to complain about.
He didn't stop there, though. Smith went on to reference the prisoner swap that had secured her freedom, emphasizing the involvement of Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout, infamously known as the Merchant of Death, and painting a picture of someone who should be nothing but grateful for the extraordinary measures taken to bring her home.
Clearly, she's not remembering who they let out to get her back.
The Merchant of Death.
The Merchant of Death. An arms dealer that wanted to kill American citizens, according to the reports. That's who they let out. Mm-hmm. For her. You would think that you would be smiling, you would be ecstatic, you would be happy, and something like this wouldn't faze you at all.
The weight of Smith's words resonated deeply with millions of Americans who had long harbored similar suspicions about Griner's true character and loyalties. Here was one of the most respected voices in sports media, finally saying what many people had been thinking but were afraid to voice publicly. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with social media platforms erupting in support of Smith's position and renewed criticism of Griner's apparent pattern of problematic behavior. However, what emerged in the aftermath would complicate the narrative in ways that few could have anticipated. It was later revealed that the quotes Smith had referenced were actually fabricated content from a satirical account designed for entertainment purposes rather than legitimate journalism. This revelation forced observers to grapple with uncomfortable questions about the nature of truth, perception, and whether the underlying criticisms of Griner remained valid regardless of the specific catalyst. The incident wasn't Smith's first encounter with satirical content being mistaken for reality. He had previously fallen for misinformation from from NBA Centel, another satirical account that imitates real news sources, suggesting a pattern that raised questions about media literacy and verification processes in the digital age. However, many supporters argued that Smith's core message about Griner's character remained fundamentally sound, regardless of the questionable source material. The incident highlighted important questions about verification in sports commentary, as noted by the Times of India, while also demonstrating how quickly public sentiment can crystallize around figures who have already established controversial reputations. The rapid spread of Smith's criticism revealed how many Americans had been waiting for an opportunity to express their frustrations with Griner's perceived ingratitude and problematic public persona. What's particularly significant about this entire affair is the response, or rather, the measured response, from both Smith and his employer. While critics demanded immediate corrections and apologies, both Smith and ESPN took time to evaluate the broader context, rather than rushing to judgment. This approach suggested a recognition that the underlying issues raised by Smith's commentary deserved serious consideration, regardless of the specific accuracy of the triggering incident. The lack of immediate consequences for Smith's statements revealed something important about the current state of sports media and public discourse. While technical accuracy is certainly important, many observers argued that Smith's core message about athlete accountability and gratitude resonated with fundamental American values that transcend any single incident or source verification issue. This measured approach stands in contrast to the hair-trigger responses often demanded in our current media environment, where public figures are expected to issue immediate apologies for any statements that generate controversy. Smith's recent massive ESPN contract, signed despite his history of provocative commentary, suggests that networks value authentic voices who are willing to address difficult topics, even when those voices occasionally rely on imperfect source material. But despite this, Brittany Griner has been in a lot of ordeal, and her reaction to those ordeal is sort of ironic. The Russian ordeal and its troubling aftermath. To fully understand the context that made Stephen A. Smith's criticism so resonant with many Americans, we must examine the complex and often troubling narrative surrounding Brittany Griner's detention in Russia and her subsequent return to the United States. While supporters have framed her experience as a tale of resilience and redemption, critics have raised legitimate questions about her decisions, her conduct during the crisis, and her response after gaining freedom. Questions that provide substantial context for the skepticism that many Americans harbor about her character and priorities. The sequence of events that led to Griner's detention reveals a pattern of questionable decision-making that many observers found deeply troubling. When Griner was arrested on February 17, 2022, at Sheremetyevo International Airport near Moscow for possessing vape cartridges with cannabis oil, she was entering a country where such substances were explicitly illegal. During a period of heightened international tensions between the United States and Russia, the timing and circumstances of her arrest raised uncomfortable questions about judgment, responsibility, and priorities. Critics pointed out that she was traveling to Russia to play for UMMC Ekaterinburg during the WNBA offseason, prioritizing financial gain over national security considerations during one of the most dangerous periods in U.S.-Russia relations since the Cold War. This decision to pursue personal profit in a hostile nation while carrying illegal substances struck many as fundamentally irresponsible and self-serving. The conditions Griner faced during her detention, while undoubtedly harsh, became a focal point for criticism about her response and the broader narrative constructed around her experience. Her descriptions of the detention center as the most filthiest place imaginable, and her accounts of psychological pressure, while generating sympathy from supporters, also raised questions about her expectations and understanding of the consequences of her choices. The physical challenges she described, including being forced to squeeze into cramped spaces designed for smaller individuals, dealing with extreme cold, and lacking basic amenities, were certainly difficult. However, critics argued that these hardships were predictable consequences of her decision to travel to an authoritarian nation with illegal substances during a period of international crisis. The focus on her suffering, they contended, obscured the more fundamental questions about the choices that led to her predicament. More troubling to many observers was the way Griner's detention became a geopolitical crisis that demanded extraordinary measures from the U.S. government. Her arrest occurred against the backdrop of heightened U.S.-Russia tensions following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, making her not just a prisoner, but a political pawn in a larger international conflict. The resources and diplomatic capital required to secure her release raised legitimate questions about priorities and fairness in American foreign policy. The prisoner exchange that ultimately secured her freedom became perhaps the most controversial aspect of the entire ordeal. When Griner was released on December 8, 2022, in exchange for Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout, many Americans questioned whether the trade represented a dangerous precedent and a fundamental misallocation of diplomatic resources. Bout, known known as the Merchant of Death, was serving a 25-year sentence for terrorism-related charges, and his release in exchange for a basketball player struck many as profoundly inappropriate. The decision to prioritize Griner over other detained Americans, particularly Paul Whelan, who had been held since 2018 on espionage charges, generated significant criticism. Critics argued that Griner's celebrity status and political utility to the Biden administration took precedence over more deserving cases, revealing troubling priorities in American diplomacy and justice. Former President Donald Trump exemplified this criticism, calling the trade a stupid and unpatriotic embarrassment, and questioning whether Griner was worth the price paid for her freedom. While Trump's comments were politically motivated, they reflected genuine concerns held by many Americans about the precedent being set and the message being sent about American priorities and values. Perhaps most troubling to critics was Griner's response upon returning to American soil and resuming her basketball career. Rather than demonstrating the profound gratitude and humility that many expected from someone who had benefited from such extraordinary government intervention, Griner's public statements and behavior suggested a troubling lack of awareness about the sacrifices made on her behalf.
Hearing the national anthem, it definitely hit different. It's like when you go for the Olympics, you're sitting there, you're about to get gold put on your neck, and the flag's going up and the anthem's going. It just hits different.
While supporters interpreted this clip as evidence of Griner's newfound appreciation for American freedom, critics heard something quite different. The casual tone, the use of informal language like "hits different," and the overall demeanor struck many as insufficiently reverent for someone who had just been rescued from a foreign prison through extraordinary diplomatic efforts. The comparison to Olympic competition seemed particularly tone-deaf, suggesting that she viewed her rescue as just another achievement rather than a profound act of grace from her country. The evolution of Griner's stance on the national anthem became another source of criticism and skepticism. Her 2020 protest, where she refused to stand for the national anthem and advocated for its removal from WNBA games, had already established her as someone willing to reject traditional expressions of patriotism in favor of political activism. Her decision to resume standing for the anthem after her release struck many critics as calculated and insincere rather than genuine. When she resumed standing for the anthem in May 2023, claiming it meant more to her after being literally in a cage, the timing and framing raised questions about authenticity. Critics argued that her newfound respect for American symbols came only after she personally benefited from American power and resources, suggesting a fundamentally transactional rather than principled relationship with patriotism. Her continued support for players who choose not to stand for the anthem further undermined claims about her transformed perspective. If her experience had truly provided profound insights about American freedom and the sacrifices made to protect it, critics argued, she would have encouraged unified respect for national symbols rather than continuing to legitimize protest and dissent. The memoir that Griner published following her release, titled Coming Home, became another focal point for criticism. Her detailed accounts of suffering and hardship, while generating sympathy from supporters, struck critics as self-serving and narcissistic. The decision to profit from her ordeal through book sales, speaking engagements, and media appearances suggested to many that she viewed her detention primarily as a career opportunity rather than a sobering experience that should have prompted humility and service. Particularly troubling to critics was her stated position on future international travel. While this statement was framed by supporters as evidence of newfound patriotism, critics heard something more concerning. The conditional nature of her willingness to represent the United States, if I make that team, suggested that even her expressions of patriotism remained transactional and self-interested. Rather than volunteering for service or expressing unconditional gratitude, she was essentially negotiating the terms under she might consider representing the country that had rescued her. The psychological aftermath of her detention also raised questions about her fitness for the platform and responsibilities that come with being a high-profile athlete. Her struggles with post-traumatic stress, sleeplessness, and depression, while understandable given her ordeal, raised legitimate concerns about her ability to handle the pressures and responsibilities of public life. Critics argued that someone dealing with such significant psychological challenges might not be in a position to make sound judgments about public statements and political positions. The broader pattern that emerged from Griner's detention and return suggested to many critics a troubling combination of poor judgment, self-interest, and insufficient gratitude that validated long-standing concerns about her character and priorities. The extraordinary efforts made to secure her freedom, including the release of a dangerous arms dealer and the expenditure possessor of significant diplomatic capital, deserved a response that demonstrated profound understanding of the sacrifices made on her behalf. Instead, critics argued, Griner's response revealed someone who viewed her rescue as validation of her importance, rather than as an undeserved gift that should have prompted fundamental changes in her approach to public life and civic responsibility. This pattern would become crucial context for understanding why Stephen A. Smith's later criticisms, even if based on fabricated quotes, resonated so strongly with many Americans who had been troubled by Griner's conduct throughout this entire ordeal. A career built on controversy and questionable choices. The misinformation incident involving Stephen A. Smith didn't occur in isolation. It was merely the latest chapter in a long, troubling pattern of controversies that have defined Brittany Griner's career and public persona. Understanding this broader context reveals why Smith's criticisms, regardless of their immediate accuracy, resonated so powerfully with many Americans who had been tracking Griner's problematic behavior for years. Her career trajectory reads like a case study in how athletic talent can overshadow serious character issues, creating a celebrity immune system that protects controversial figures from appropriate accountability. The foundation for Griner's controversial reputation was established early in her career, revealing character traits that would become recurring themes throughout her professional life. Her first major incident occurred in 2010 during her freshman year at Baylor University, when she punched an opposing player, Jordan Barncastle, breaking her nose during a game against Texas Tech. While supporters dismissed this as typical competitive intensity, critics saw it as evidence of poor impulse control and a concerning willingness to use her overwhelming physical advantages to harm opponents. The incident resulted in only a 2-game suspension from the NCAA, a punishment that many viewed as insufficiently serious given the nature of the assault. The relatively light consequences established a pattern that would follow Griner throughout her career. Her athletic value seemed to consistently outweigh concerns about her conduct and character. This early incident also revealed troubling attitudes about violence and competition that would manifest in various forms throughout her professional life. The 2015 domestic violence incident represents perhaps the most serious and disturbing chapter in Griner's controversial career. On April 22, 2015, Griner and her then-fiancée Glory Johnson were arrested for assault and disorderly conduct following a violent altercation at their shared home. The incident involved pushing, wrestling, punches, and throwing objects, resulting in injuries to both parties. Griner sustained a bite wound and scratches, while Johnson suffered facial injuries and a diagnosed concussion. The severity of this incident cannot be overstated. Domestic violence represents one of the most serious character failures possible, revealing fundamental problems with anger management, respect for others, and understanding of appropriate boundaries in relationships. The WNBA's response, suspending both players for 7 games and mandating counseling, while seemingly appropriate, raised questions about whether the league was more concerned with public relations than with addressing serious behavioral problems. What made this incident particularly troubling was the aftermath and Griner's apparent inability to learn from the experience. Despite the arrest, the suspension, and the required counseling, she proceeded to marry Johnson just weeks later, only to file for annulment within a month. This pattern of impulsive decision-making, followed by immediate regret, suggested someone fundamentally unsuited for the responsibilities that come with public platform and professional athletics. The domestic violence incident also revealed troubling aspects of Griner's character that extended beyond just anger management issues. The legal proceedings exposed a pattern of volatile behavior, poor judgment, and an apparent inability to maintain stable personal relationships. The fact that this incident occurred during her professional career, when she presumably had access to resources, counseling, and support systems, made it particularly damning. The 2020 national anthem protest marked another significant controversy that revealed Griner's problematic relationship with American values and institutions. Following the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, Griner not only refused to stand for the national anthem, but actively advocated for its complete removal from WNBA games. This wasn't just personal protest. It was an attempt to impose her political views on the entire league and its fans. The timing and nature of her protest revealed a troubling pattern of prioritizing political activism over respect for the country that had provided her with opportunities for success and celebrity. While she claimed her protest wasn't meant to disrespect America, her actions suggested otherwise. The decision to attack the national anthem itself, rather than working constructively for change, demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of patriotism and civic responsibility. What made her protest particularly problematic was the context of her privileged position. As a professional athlete earning substantial income and enjoying celebrity status, Griner had access to platforms and resources that most Americans could never dream of having. Her decision to use that platform to attack American symbols and institutions struck many as not just ungrateful, but actively harmful to the country that had made her success possible. The recent controversy involved involving Caitlin Clark added another disturbing dimension to Griner's pattern of problematic behavior. In May 2025, video evidence suggested that Griner used derogatory language, possibly including racial slurs, directed at the rookie sensation during a game. While the lack of audio made definitive conclusions impossible, the incident fit a troubling pattern of aggressive behavior and poor sportsmanship that had characterized Griner's career. The fact that Indiana Governor Mike Braun felt compelled to call for a WNBA investigation into the incident demonstrated how Griner's reputation for controversial behavior had reached the point where elected officials felt obligated to intervene. This level of public concern about an athlete's conduct is virtually unprecedented and speaks to the seriousness of the character issues that have followed Griner throughout her career. The pattern of controversies surrounding Griner reveals several troubling character traits that validate many of the criticisms leveled against her. Her history demonstrates poor impulse control, questionable judgment, a tendency toward violence, problematic political positions, and an apparent inability to learn from past mistakes. These aren't isolated incidents, but rather consistent patterns that suggest fundamental character defects. Perhaps most troubling is how Griner's athletic talent and celebrity status have consistently protected her from appropriate consequences for her behavior. The domestic violence incident should have been career-ending, yet she was quickly rehabilitated and restored to prominence. Her anti-American protests should have disqualified her from representing the United States in international competition, yet she continued to receive opportunities and support from American institutions. This pattern of protection and rehabilitation, despite serious character issues, has created a sense of immunity that many Americans find deeply troubling. When someone consistently demonstrates poor judgment, engages in violent behavior, and attacks American institutions, yet continues to be celebrated and rewarded, it sends a dangerous message about accountability and values in American society. The Russian detention incident, viewed in the context of this broader pattern, takes on a different significance. Rather than being an isolated case of someone making a simple mistake, it appears to be the inevitable result of years of poor decision-making, questionable judgment, and an inflated sense of importance and immunity from consequences. Griner's decision to travel to Russia with illegal substances during a period of international crisis wasn't just poor judgment. It was consistent with a pattern of prioritizing personal gain over responsible behavior that had characterized her entire career. The extraordinary efforts required to secure her release, including the controversial prisoner exchange, represented yet another example of how her celebrity status protected her from the consequences of her choices. The aftermath of her release, including her memoir, media appearances, and continued controversial statements, suggested that she had learned little from the experience. Rather than demonstrating genuine humility and gratitude, she appeared to view her detention and rescue as further validation of her importance and platform, continuing the pattern of self-serving behavior that had defined her career. Stephen A. Smith's criticism, even if based on fabricated quotes, tapped into genuine frustration with this pattern of behavior and the apparent immunity from consequences that Griner had enjoyed throughout her career. The fact that so many Americans found his criticisms believable and appropriate speaks to the broader concern about character, accountability, and values in American sports and society. The Griner case represents more than just one athlete's controversial career. It's a symbol of how celebrity culture and athletic achievement can override fundamental questions about character and conduct. Her continued prominence, despite serious character issues, sends troubling messages about what American society values and what behavior it's willing to tolerate from those who achieve athletic success. When influential figures like Stephen A. Smith finally speak out about these patterns, even if occasionally relying on imperfect information, they're addressing concerns that many Americans have harbored for years, but felt unable to express in our current cultural climate. The real tragedy isn't that Smith made a mistake about specific quotes. It's that the underlying character issues he identified have been allowed to persist without appropriate accountability for so long. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting video clips like this, click on the cards on your screen.